Let me tell you what happened to me. At the end of this, you can decide if I'm a leader or not. Here's the fire. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And now let me give you a little bit about how I came to be in the killing chamber that night and the spiritual currents that led me there. I think leadership is about soul. Leadership is about catching on fire with something we see is wrong or needs to be changed or where people are hurting. And we get in and we start doing something. That, to me, is what a real leader is. A real leader is someone like Pope Francis that I was with last week. And what was I doing with Pope Francis? I wasn't there because I'm a Catholic nun who I get to see the Pope. I was there because he was involved with me in trying to save the life of a man, Richard Glossop, in Oklahoma, who's innocent, and Oklahoma almost killed him 3 times. And when you know somebody is about to be killed and you know they're innocent, you do everything you know how to do to resist that and to make sure that doesn't happen. And one of the things was to contact Pope Francis because I know he's a man who cares about the wounded. He's trying to get the Catholic Church to get out of buildings and just kind of enforcing rules and who's in and who's out to be, as he calls it, a field hospital, getting out there where people are wounded and hurting. And isn't that what we're all called to be? Soul is much deeper than ego. I'm going to be a little leader. I've got my little blueprint. I'm going to set my little goals, and voila. I'm a leader, and I can do the dog pound thing with you if you want. Here's how it started. We awakened to a deep call in us. We all long. We're made to do something loving and truthful with our lives. All of us, we're made that way by God. What happened is, I was itching to do something. I wasn't sure. And by the way, in Pope Francis's life, too, there was failure before he arrived at this great soul, which he's helping the whole world now. He just spent 40 minutes with the leader of Iran to try to help promote world peace. But there were failures because he hadn't found his wave. It's like you boat and you wait and you're rowing. And then a wave comes. It's to catch that wave. Another way of talking about it is suddenly you awaken to something. And with me, what it was, I'm a good Catholic nun. I was teaching kids. I wasn't batting them around with the ruler and all that. Even when I taught 8th grade boys English grammar. Now, I don't know. I work with people on death row, 8th grade boys, teaching them grammar. I don't know. It's close, okay? But I didn't get it about the call in the Gospels of Jesus to do justice. I knew about charity. I knew about being kind to people. But I lived in New Orleans. There are 10 major housing projects in New Orleans. African-American people still struggling with jobs, struggling with education, struggling with no health care, struggling with relationships with the police that are less than Pacific, shall we say. And I was oblivious to that in the suburbs. And I had grown up in privilege. I didn't know I was growing up in privilege. But I grew up in the days when everybody was segregated, even in church. I never questioned it, and that's what culture does. Culture gives us eyes and ears and says, honey, that's the way we do things in the South. It's better for the races to be separate. And my awakening, and we know when it's a deep spiritual awakening, because it changes the trajectory of our life and we never look back. And what happened is I got it, that what the gospel of Jesus was about, and all deep religious traditions are about, was about being a person of justice. And I awakened. And so the first thing I did was move into the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans, and African American people became my teachers. And it's not that I was a bad person. I was a good person, and people are good. But what it did when I moved into St. Thomas, the people taught me what it means when you're not a white woman and the police stop you. I was never afraid of police. My car broke down on the highway at 2 in the morning, state trooper pulled up behind me. I'm not scared, they're gonna help me. All the experiences were different. It was like I was in a different country. All the rules were different. Especially like school. I went to great schools. I went to college. I got a master's. Education, educare, awakens us to our gifts so that we can be agents of change in the world. And kids are coming in who had been in a public school as far as the junior year, and they couldn't even read a third grade reader. And it made me feel ashamed of myself, like, why was I given all the privilege? I better do something with this. And then I got this invitation to write A Man on Death Row. Do you think when I wrote The Man on Death Row, I thought that I was going to end up in an execution chamber, that I would end up accompanying 6 people to execution? Do you think I thought that? I thought I'd just write a letter. That connection, it's that connection. And it's electrifying because I wrote, he wrote, his name was Patrick Saunier. I went to visit him. I did this in the 80s when everybody and their cat in the United States was for the death penalty. In the 80s, 80-something% of people all favored the death penalty, thought it was a good thing. We were afraid. We were afraid of the criminals. We were told, if we don't execute these people, they're going to get out and they're going to kill again. The only thing we can do to be safe, they killed, they deserve to die. There it is. There's the justice. There's the logic. And I met the man on death row. I'd never met anybody who murdered anybody before. I thought he would look different. I really did. I thought his face would be different, like mean looking, like you see those mug shots. And I looked at this heavy grate, and I went, oh my God, he's human. He said, thank you, sister, for making that long drive. I appreciate you coming to see me. I don't know the crime yet, but I know he's a human being. And from Amnesty International, I'd begun to learn about human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 3, everyone has a right to life. Article 5, no one should be subject to cruel and degrading punishment. So I began to visit him. And then I went into the Prison Coalition office one day. And I just said, could I have some background information on the Saunier case? And they said, sure. And they brought out this whole stack of files, and I opened the one on the top. And there on the front page of a little newspaper in Louisiana where Cajun people live, the Daily Iberian, were the faces of 2 beautiful teenage kids, David LeBlanc and Loretta Bourque. Their parents had sent their prom photo into the paper. And there was the headline, in big, bold, dark letters, teenagers found murdered. And then I read the story of how this man and his brother on a November night raped the girl and shot and killed these 2 teenage kids and left them, their bodies, near the sugarcane field, plunging their families forever into tragedy and chaos. And I now was right in the middle of that because I was a spiritual advisor to the man who had killed them. A journey then began. And when you get to something like the death penalty, we have this ambivalence in us because it is ethical and right to feel outrage at the death of innocent people. These were 2 teenage kids who went to a football game on a Friday night, and before the evening was over, they are dead, killed in cold blood, and here's the person who did it with his brother. And what are we going to do about that? I made a big mistake, and when I wrote the book, Dead Man Walking, I had a really good editor because I downplayed a mistake I made with the victim's family. I didn't know what to do with the victim's family. I'd never done this before. I'm the spiritual advisor to the man who did the murder, so I stayed away from them. I figured I'm the last person in the world they're going to want to see. And I met them then, at the worst possible time because it's at a pardon board hearing. A week before Pat Saunier was executed, you had 5 governor appointees, and it's to see all the reasons, if any clemency, ought to be shown to this man. And the victim's family are there because they have packed the place to say, we want justice done. And what they have been told and what they've been made to believe and what they believe in their hearts is justice means only one thing. He and his brother killed our child, so he ought to die. And I met them at the pardon board hearing, and what was I doing there? I was one of the few people saying to the pardon board, don't kill Patrick Saunier. We were walking outside while the pardon board was voting, and I ran right into them. And they were furious at me, and they had every right to be. I had done it all wrong. I hadn't even called them. I hadn't even written them a note to say, look, I'm sorry about your son or your daughter. I had done nothing. I deserved their anger. The girls' parents saw me first, walked by me in silence, averted their faces. And right behind them were the boys' parents. Lloyd and Eula LeBlanc. And surprised by grace, he walked right up to me, and Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David, said, Sister Helen, all this time you've been visiting those 2 brothers, and you didn't want to come see us. Sister, we had nobody to talk to. You can't believe the pressure on us for the death penalty. Everybody's saying to me, Lloyd, you gotta be for the death penalty. It looked like you didn't love your boy. I never thought of that. I thought surely any family, you lose a loved one, and here's the prosecutor coming and saying, we're going to get justice for you. He said, Sister, I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me. And I did. Lloyd LeBlanc, this father of the boy that was killed, is the hero of Dead Man Walking. I'm not the hero. I'm just a storyteller, and I made a bad mistake. And he took me with me. He took me into his heart, and he brought me into this journey. He said, Sister, people think forgiveness is weak. Like, well, forgive, you condone what they did. You lost your boy, they killed him, and you forgive them. And he said, here's what I experienced. Everybody was saying that to me, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty. I went there. I did it. My imagination, man, I pictured myself pulling that switch slowly because I wanted him to feel pain for what he did to us. And then he said, I began to notice I was angry all the time. I'm snapping at Eula, my wife, and Vicky, our daughter. And I always have been kind. I'm a person who loves to help people. I'm good with my hands. You're going to come to my house, you're going to see lawnmowers and cars. Hey, Lloyd, will you fix this? And I was losing it. And he did his hand like this, and he said, then I said, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to go down another road, the road of forgiveness. He's the first victim's family I ever met that taught me that what forgiveness is about, first of all, is not first and foremost relieving the burden of the one who's guilty of hurting you. Maybe it does that, but it was to save his own life. And maybe that's what, when all the spiritual leaders, like when Jesus says, love your enemies, when we have the Dalai Lama saying to us, love our enemies because they're going to teach us something about ourselves. There's a lesson to learn from enemies. All the deep spiritual traditions are that we are made to be one, not separated from each other, and not returning hate for hate. That love is more powerful than any force of evil in the world. So through Lloyd LeBlanc, I began to go over to the murder victims' families and go to those support groups to see what can be done when people have had violence. And look at all the people, the thousands and thousands of people that have violence done to them. We need to really reach out to them. There need to be real state compensation programs to help people get counseling. 70% of people who lose a child get divorced. Whatever fault lines are in the marriage, you're going to break apart, you grieve differently. One wants to keep the child's clothes as a memorial. The other says, honey, we got to move on, we got other kids. It breaks you apart. There's all kind of healing that needs to happen. Do we really think that telling a victim's family to wait 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, and that you'll be summoned in, a representative of the family, and come and sit in a special place and watch as the state kills the one who killed your loved one, and that will heal you and give you peace and put you back together by watching the violence that the state does in imitation of the worst thing people can do to each other? How can it ever heal us? To me, they're like two arms on the cross, if you use the cross and the crucifixion as an image. God loves all of us. We're not there. We take sides. But it stretches us. It stretches us. Because here are the victims. How can we reach out to them? And on the other side, here's the person who did the crime. And I end up going over to both arms of that cross because I'm with Patrick when they execute him. And that's the opening that I gave to you. They killed a man with fire one night. That's going to be the prelude in a book I'm writing now called River of Fire, where I tell my spiritual journey of the awakening and how faith awakens us to action. I mean, and when you look in the tradition like of the Gospels, I mean, Jesus says this. It's not those that say, Lord, Lord. It's not those necessarily pray all the time, go to church. It's when I was hungry, did you give me to eat? When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? Boy, there, where it counts, where people are hurting. Boy, I heard that call. When they killed Patrick, he had said to me, Sister, he can't be there at the end because it could scar you to see this. And I had never done this before. All I knew was, I said, Patrick, you're not going to die alone without one face to look at. I'm not condoning what he did. He's not a hero. He and his brother killed innocent kids. But now he's going to be killed. And I said, look, when they do this, you look at me. Look at my face. I wanted him to know his dignity. I wanted him to see a loving face when he died. And I walked out of the execution chamber that night. I didn't know how it was going to change my life. They bring you in a prison vehicle after an execution out to the front of the gates of the Louisiana State Penitentiary. It was dark. It was the middle of the night. We used to do the executions at midnight. And I threw up. I knew what he had done. I knew his crime. But I had never watched a human being in a protocol deliberately put to death. And my mission, my call, happened that night because I remember thinking, clear as a bell, it's why I'm standing before you today. It's why I stay on the road giving talks to people all over the place. Because I remember thinking the people are never going to get close to this. They're going to read in the paper the next morning, look at the crime. Justice was done, execution last night. But I've been brought close. I'm a witness. I've seen it with my own eyes. So my job is to get out to talk to the people. And you do that through story. So I wrote Dead Man Walking. I wrote this book. I had a great editor in New York, Jason Epstein. Catholic nun. I only work with these great Jewish editors. I wrote 2 books, Dead Man Walking and Death of Innocence. And boy, they helped me, and they got the book of Dead Man Walking out. 1993, what chance does a book on the death penalty have from a Catholic nun in the 90s where 80%, 78% of the people were for the death penalty? And in the Deep South, like I'm not sure about Tennessee. There's something about Tennessee. You remained above it a little bit. You have some executions, but not near as many as the other southern states, who do 75% of the executions, by the way. Interesting thing to note. The theory is we're going to give the death penalty to the worst of the worst. In practice, 75% of all executions happen in the 10 southern states that practice slavery. What does that mean? And so when Dead Man Walking came out in 93, everybody in their cats for the death penalty. But you never know when you write a book. You put it out there, it unleashes, and it went right into the lap of Susan Sarandon when she was making a client in Memphis. Her friend Arlene gave her the book and said, Susan, don't read this before you go to sleep at night. Susan Sarandon read Dead Man Walking, and she knew we need to have a film. Pestered Tim Robbins for 9 months, probably for domestic tranquility, read the book. And by the end of '95, we had a film that got the Academy Award for Susan, with 1.3 billion people in the world watching the Academy Award that night. You just do our little bit. We get in there and do what we do because we know what we have to do. We know what we know, and we get in there and we do it. All I know about leadership is, here's my best definition of a leader: somebody who sees a need, something wrong, and gets in there and starts doing something. That's what a leader is. Wrote the book because we needed to get the word out, stay on the road. My webpage is sisterhelen.org, and you can follow the work and be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.